All right, great to see a diverse crowd here. My Sufi friends from Louisville, welcome. And my loyal and beloved Dominican sisters, welcome. Colleagues, welcome. Friends, welcome. This is the first dialogue in the Dialogo series. I'm Matt Brandstetter, Chair of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department here at St. Catharine. Dialogos is an interreligious exploration into the four pillars of Dominican life: prayer, study, ministry, and the one we are beginning with tonight, community. I see these are Dominican pillars, but they are also universal. Not Dominican as opposed to universal, but both Dominican and universal. If it were merely Dominican, we would have the monopoly on them, and there wouldn't be much to learn from other traditions. As they are universal, we're very excited and open and eager to learn from other traditions. As I was searching the internet for an opening quotation, one came to me that was attributed on various websites, both to a Cistercian monk and to a Sufi poet. My bet would be it originated with a Sufi poet, but the monk was Thomas Keating, a great pioneer in contemplative dialogue, and the poet was the great Sufi poet Jalaluddin Rumi. And it goes like this: silence is the language of God, all else is just poor translation. So in the spirit of that, we're going to begin with 2 full minutes of silence as people will continue to come in undoubtedly. But let's take this time to really settle in to silence, both externally, internally, spiritually. So we will begin now. Okay, thank you. Now, is that a Muslim or a Christian silence? A Buddhist silence, maybe, or an interfaith silence? Or if we're still considering such ideas, is it the case that we have not yet entered into silence? As my students know, I'm usually not in the mood to be linear, so I figured I would introduce dialogos with a few analogies, okay? So here we go. The first is this. So question. Is rhythm in the sound or is it in the silence? It's in both, right? Without silence, no rhythm. Without sound, no rhythm. If you had all noise, no rhythm. If you had all silence, no rhythm. Okay, that's my first analogy. Okay, the second one. I often will show a picture of outer space to students. It's from the Hubble telescope. So you can see these vast stretches of outer space and these swirling cauldrons of light there. And I ask them, what's that a picture of? And sometimes they'll say stars. And I'll be like, no, those are galaxies. So perhaps 100 billion stars, most of them larger than our sun. But that's still not the point. So I said, what really is that a picture of? Empty space. It's about 95% empty space. So what does that say about the human mind? We see a picture which is 95% empty space, 5% swirling galaxies, and we say it's a picture of the galaxies. That's my second analogy. Let's see. Third is, for you people who drove from Louisville, at one point you may have seen a road sign that said merge. At one point you may have seen a sign that said stop, or yield, or wrong way. Now, if you saw all those signs right next to one another, you wouldn't know what to do. It would be hopelessly contradictory. But if you put a little space in between them, they become guideposts on the way. Okay, a couple more. Our body's arranged in such a way that if it wasn't for the empty space in our throat and in our mouth, there'd be no way for words to emerge. Our ears are designed in such a way that if it wasn't for that empty space, there'd be no way to receive the words. What does that tell us? This is the class participation time. What can we derive from those facts, do you think? I would say it's the same facts that we derive from that empty space is the very possibility of those galaxies. And that silence, that emptiness, that stillness is the very possibility of dialogue. One more interesting tidbit. Do you know that silent and listen are just rearrangements of the same basic letters? That says something, that to listen is more than the absence of talking. To listen fully, deeply, is the presence of silence. So when I build this as a dialogue between Kabir and Brother Paul, that's really not true. It's the presence of the silence in the listeners that give them the raw material that they'll be working with. And the understanding is that if we can listen fully, then it opens up the opportunity for them to speak from their hearts, from the depths of that silence. And I think these two men are up to the task. So, by way of introduction here, to my immediate left, Brother Paul Quenon entered the monastery of Gethsemane in 1958 under the tutelage of Thomas Merton, who was his novice master. An acclaimed photographer, poet, Brother Paul is the author of 4 books of poetry, I think 3 of which are out there. So if anyone is interested after the talk, if we can tear him away, we'll get you a signed copy. And to his left, Shaikh Kabir Helminski. Kabir was named as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world in 2009. And in Islam, which is blossoming in so many different directions at the current time, that says a lot. He's the first Westerner to be officially recognized as a Shaikh of the Mevlevi order, a lineage going all the way back to Rumi. He's translated many volumes of Sufi literature, including many from Rumi, several are out there, and also 2 books on his own, Living Presence and The Knowing Heart, and we have a copy of The Knowing Heart also. So I'm playing the role of moderator, but I'm going to be a very moderate moderator. We've got a pretty open-ended outline for you to follow, and if you don't have one, there should be some moving around still. But I figured we would start with just a basic introduction, and I would like for you guys to introduce yourselves in terms of the communities to which you belong, especially the monastic community, and within that, so you might say something about monastic Christian life within the larger life of the church, and then perhaps the Cistercians within the context of Christian monastic life. Brother Paul, if you would begin then. Just push it.
Yes, well, very fine introduction. Thank you very much. You certainly put us in the right space. The Abbey of Gethsemane belongs to the Cistercian order, and the Cistercian order is a branch of the Benedictine phenomenon. The rule of Saint Benedict, goes way back to 500s, and the Cistercians were a 12th century reform of the Benedictine order. It wasn't really quite an order, it's just a bunch of monasteries, and then we became an order. And so the Cistercians are monks who live, kind of a very disciplined life. We're known for our silence. People talk about the vow of silence, getting back to silence, where we don't really take a vow of silence. What we do is have an observance of silence. And the whole monastic phenomenon within the Catholic Church is something that goes back to the 3rd century. And it's a kind of spirituality in which we focus on living with God, and as part of that we leave the world. So the first monks would go out to the desert and live as hermits in caves, take up some teaching with a master, a hermit who's already been living this kind of life. And then eventually these hermits started getting together into communities. So that's the characteristic of the Cistercian life and the Benedictine life, is a community life. And that's all as much as I need to say at the moment.
Okay, Kabir, I was hoping that you might say a word about Sufism in the context of Islam, and then the Malevi order in the context of Sufism.
In the Islamic tradition, we speak about several levels of participation in the spiritual journey. The first level is the level of religion. You're born into it, you practice it to the best of your ability. The spiritual path is something, however, another level that one chooses. A Sufi order is a vehicle for this spiritual path. To become a Sufi or to go on the Sufi path usually means that you have taken hand with a teacher and become part of a particular lineage, and there are many lineages. The tree of Sufism has many branches that are not in competition with each other, but part of that single tree. But it is a choice to go on an experiential path to God. We don't have monasticism in Islam, except in certain orders like ours. Traditionally, we used to have a period of 1,001 days of training in which a person would live in very much like a monastic situation. But it was viewed as a period of a certain kind of spiritual education. So you have the level of religion, you have the level of the path, and then you have two other levels that are referred to that have no institutions. The third level would be called gnosis or knowingness, and the fourth level would be called realization of reality. So we recognize that there are these four levels that are possible for a human being. The Sufi orders would typically trace back to some founding person, someone who reached illumination, who had a breakthrough, who experienced and matured in intimacy with God, and in a sense opened up a way. And then those in succeeding generations who came along went on that way. The Sufi path is always a path that is integrated with everyday life. Being a Sufi Shaikh, for instance, is not a profession. It's a calling, but we would typically have a livelihood of our own in addition to our teaching. So Sufis have been very much, for 14 centuries, the Sufi tradition has been very integrated with everyday life, but with a spiritual discipline that involves certain forms of meditation, chanting, worship. But the essence of it all is called remembrance of God, which is something that we strive to attain with every breath. Remembrance of God is not an intellectual activity. It is a consciousness in the heart. And the heart knows that we are living in the divine reality and is aware of that and grateful for that. Then we can be said to be in remembrance. So all of the practices, all of the teachings are aimed to bring the human being to that stage where more of our time, more of our life, will be lived in the remembrance of God. And that our souls will conform to that divine reality, or will be in harmony with, and God willing, influenced by the qualities of the divine. So Rumi lived in the 13th century. He was also not only a great saint, a man of incredible humility and sanctity, but also a huge literary figure. He's been the most popular poet even in North America for the last 30 years, and known worldwide. So he left behind an extraordinary literature that is like a rich legacy, touching on so many aspects of the human journey, spiritual experience. And his tradition, the Mevlevi tradition, which is our tradition, has been a kind of brotherhood and sisterhood, particularly for centuries within the Ottoman world. And it attracted to itself people who were not only committed to spiritual transformation, but people who tended to be also artistic, creative, and you might say intellectually capable. I think the beauty of Rumi as a spiritual figure, which is appreciated very much today, is that he is a creative voice. His notion of the divine is so beautifully nuanced that the more we get to know Rumi, the more our sense of the divine is transformed. He can offer us simple and unforgettable metaphors, such as, we have shown you the dust, but hidden the wind. All of this existence is the dust. The divine is the wind. He speaks of faith as, he talks about a millstone on a river, turning, turning, turning. And he says, this is how the millstone professes faith in the river's existence. It sounds like a ridiculous statement. But for Rumi, the divine reality was as apparent to him as the river is apparent to the turning millstone. So all of our action is really a continuous profession of faith, bearing witness to your eternal power, just as the powerful turning of the millstone professes faith in the river's existence. These are some examples of how Rumi spoke about the divine reality. So that's our tradition. We're also the tradition of the whirling dervishes. One of our practices, a central practice, is the whirling ceremony, which has become very iconic in recent decades especially. It's a ceremony that involves a meditation in motion, supported by a classical music, usually an ensemble of at least several musicians and vocalists. It has its choreography that is a living cosmology. And it is above all an act of worship, but worship with an extraordinary aesthetic quality and beauty to it. So that's a little bit about us in the Mevlevi tradition of Rumi.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite you guys into a conversation. And the general parameter of this first conversation is community as a spiritual guide. So Brother Paul, I'm going to start with you. Just take a minute. And then bring up a question that is relevant to a community as a spiritual guide. And you two can take it up and explore and see what emerges.
I think of community as a group of people, at least who are all on the same spiritual path. The monastery is very selective about who enters and who stays. And the first requirement, according to the rule of St. Benedict, is that they are seeking God. You might say that in the process of seeking God, we come together with the same intention. But the fact of the matter is, we might have different visions of what that is. So you're going to have a unified community, but it's not necessarily unified by the same vision. There is something of the vision defined by the rule of St. Benedict, but then people have different interpretations of the rule of St. Benedict. The quality of the monastic orders is such that they are not particularly dominated by a major teacher such as Rumi. A charismatic teacher is not, I mean, Benedict wrote a wonderful rule, but I wouldn't say he makes the best spiritual reading in the world. The Cistercians were already in existence when St. Bernard came along, who was a literary giant and a wonderful spiritual teacher. But the community already existed, so there's something about the quality of monasticism and the way the Cistercian order was founded, which was like a collective effort. You know, it was a group of people who founded the Cistercians. It wasn't one only person, but it was like we talk about the three founding fathers. And none of these three were left any legacy of outstanding inspiration, except an inspiration which helps to keep the order, define the order, and keep it moving forward in time. So what do you have that's pulling us together is the search for God. It's the faith. And I think you might speak in terms of a sense of faith rather than a vision of faith. And the sensus fidei is something that kind of pervades the community, and it's a rather obscure thing, but there's this kind of a life which is going on, and is a life which is expressed in the sacraments and in the recitation of the Psalms, which we do, 7 times a day. And so what you have in the monastic phenomenon is a structure. We were given a structure, and people move into that structure. And the structure includes practices such as silence, such as liturgical prayer, such as obedience to the abbot and obedience to one another in community. And so what was the question?
You're coming up with a question. So that's the idea. What is the question in that? Or what is that, if that is the answer, what's the question? The idea is that you two can explore the question together, probe its depths.
Yeah, so I guess that maybe it's a mistake to try to pose the question. The question, I believe, is what is it that pulls together the monastic community. As opposed, well, maybe there's nothing to oppose to it, but what is the thing that pulls together the monastic community? What is it that makes the community a community? And, the chief inspiration for that is Jesus Christ. I mean, everybody reads the gospel, and that's sort of the core of our whole reading program. And everybody is pulled together by the love of Christ and the love of God in Christ. So if we have anything like there's all kinds of gifted writers and charismatic figures, but it all goes back to Christ. And it's Christ that we celebrate every day in the liturgy. So you might, say that is what unifies the community.
So the question might be, what is it that pulls people together in spiritual community? That's a question that both of you can explore. It's open-ended enough that both of you can explore. And let's see how the answers coalesce.
Maybe another way to pose the question is, how necessary is community and human relationship to spiritual development? Sufism is a very relational spirituality. The ultimate relationship, the most important relationship, is our relationship with the divine. At the same time, we believe in a continuum that necessitates or accepts the fact that our human relationships, the quality of our relationships, is a criteria for our realization of the divine, that we are more likely to realize the divine reality more comprehensively in relationship to other human beings, that there is a divine purpose in our relationships, and that we use community as a means to realizing the divine. I would define community, one way to define community is to say that a community is a group of people with a common vibration. Vibration is not just a quantitative something, it's also a qualitative something. And any community can work and contribute qualitatively to that common vibration: friendship, love, self-sacrifice, discipline, consciousness. We help each other by reflecting those qualities to each other. There's a danger in being alone. The danger is the delusion of our egoism. It's strange when somebody says, I love God, but I don't relate to people very well. In the Mevlevi tradition, the foremost practice is not meditation, worship, service. It's going to sound almost shocking to say this, but the foremost practice in our tradition is called adab, a word you've never even heard. But let me translate it for you. It's spiritual courtesy. It is the courtesy of conscious relationship. It is how we meet each other. It is how we treat each other It is the way we speak to each other. It is the way we serve each other. Sufism builds community in a loose sense of the word. We're not a residential community. We're a community of people that may meet once or twice a week, some cases once or twice a year. But if ideally once or twice a week, we come together to share spiritual practice, to serve the guest, to serve each other, to express beauty through music, through the arts, through cooking, through receiving the guest. The guest is God in our eyes. So we develop community at the same time that we each have our everyday lives, our individual livelihoods, our own marriage partners and families, if it be our destiny to have those things. But we cultivate community all the time in terms of the moment we step into the Sufi lodge, it's called a tekya or khanaka or zawiya, the moment we enter into the meeting place of the Sufis, we step across the threshold into sacred space. And everything in that sacred space is intentional. There's nothing random. Secular space is very different. It's full of commercial messages, randomness, you know what it's like. But the sacred space of the Sufi lodge is a place where everything has a meaning, and every gesture has a meaning, and every relationship is proportioned to maximize the possibility of remembering God at that moment. So adab means spiritual courtesy. It's something subtle, something you catch. There's no rule book for it. It is characterized by gentleness, humility, service, self-awareness, and even how we speak, how we language things. For instance, in Mevlevi tradition, in the 1001 Days training, in the morning when people were awakened, someone would go from door to door, and they would say gently, "Be aware." That's how you were woken up in the morning. It would have been somebody's job to tend to the candles and lamps. And a Mevlevi dervish would never say, "Put out a candle" or "put out a lamp." It's too harsh. They would say, "It's time to put the candles to rest," or "It's time to awaken the lamps." So they had a way of speaking as well. And sometimes it's almost comical, but let's say you lost your keys, and Mevlevi dervish would say, he wouldn't say, or she wouldn't say, "I lost my keys." They would say, "My keys have gone to the unseen." So the attempt here was to formulate a conscious way of life where the implications of language were very conscious. I know as an American sometimes I'll say to somebody, "Let's go grab some food." This would not be a Sufi way of speaking. So adab was, I say it's the foremost practice because it is through this practice that a certain affection is awakened in the community. And when you put others' needs, or try to, I'm not saying we are successful at this, I'm only saying what we try to do. But you put others' needs before your own. learn step by step to be more and more aware of your effect on others and on your environment. You may pick up a glass of water, like as I didn't remember to do, but so been given this bottle of water. What a gift, really. Praise be to God that there's pure water to drink, such quality and so much of it. As a Sufi, I would kiss the cup before drinking from it.
There's
Very
so much
discreet.
here that reminds me of our own practices. I love this theme of courtesy. And in the stories of the Desert Fathers, the hermits coming together, they would greet one another with heartbreaking courtesy, was the expression. And the practice in the monastic life, is that when we pass one another in the cloister, we should give a silent greeting. And when I entered, there was a definite code. There was the moderate bow, and then if you met which you would give to any other monk, and then there was the profound bow, which you would give to the abbot if you met him. Well, we still have the greetings, one way or another, but of course, silence is quality of that greeting. And there's so much else. In the old days, when you took a glass of water, you held it up to somebody else who was in the room and asked their blessing that you could drink that water. Well, that was quickly disappearing by the time I entered the monastery, Americans. So the Cistercians had a theme of affectio in their writings. This defines the relationship between one monk and another. And affectio is affection, of course, but it's really something much deeper than that, too. It's not just a bunch of men bumping up against one another in an all-male community, such as we had. But I think it's rooted in that courtesy, and in the sense that the other person is Christ. That you're just not greeting Joe, but you're your brother.
Yeah, this seems like your adab, what we call adab. Yeah, how beautiful. Affectio. And I call this applied spirituality. I wish there were a course, a book, a discipline. I think there deserves to be a discipline called applied spirituality that could be very much an interspiritual subject. When we talk about, apart from our differing theologies and mythologies and our heritage and tradition, but apart from that, what are the ways that we take the truth of our experience of the divine and apply it in our relationships, in our actions, and in our livelihood?
Perhaps you don't have such a thing as a rule and guidelines. The characteristic of our monastic life is that it does follow a written rule, more or less. And of course it's quite an ancient rule, so the adaptation has to be made. So you have the constitutions, which is something that's been devised by a group effort of all the abbots in the order, and brought up to date as a great effort since the 1960s to have a constitution. And then each house has guidelines. And so one of the guidelines is when we meet one another, we give a silent greeting, such as I just talked about. The thing about the monastic community, it's not, you have the abbot, but it doesn't all depend on the abbot. The abbot may or may not be a spiritually gifted person, but he's something. He is who we agreed to being, the father of the community, and we in the abbot we see Christ. But the abbot is not simply functioning alone; he is following the rule. So you have he has certain limits and certain directives. But see, that's still not a very stable situation. What you have in the monastic life is a third element, and that is the community. So it's a tripod. And all three have to work together. The abbot can't simply ignore the rule, nor can he ignore the community. The abbot, so if to listen to the community. And so this is the energy, this is the structure of the monastic phenomenon. It certainly does work from a kind of a spiritual fermentation that people bring with them, and it continues. But there's a structural element here that, you could say that's the thing I'm least interested in. It may be the least attractive part of our life, but nevertheless, it has kept the monastic orders in existence for centuries and centuries, because we're not always reinventing the wheel. And its stability depends on the people who are doing it, on a good leadership, and if you don't have a good leadership, the other two just kind of fall apart also. So there's form, there's spirit, and then there's person, the personality, the personhood of the superior and all the members of the community are the principal elements that sort of make us what we are.
Yes, this is touching on something important, which is tradition. We have our directives too, and not in the, perhaps not so much in an explicit a rule as Saint Benedict might have offered, but we have many sayings from the Prophet Muhammad, for instance, many principles that we attempt to follow. One example would be backbiting, not allowed. Neither speaking of it nor the listening to it. Another principle that relates to community is that if someone has hurt you, or offended you, or you have an issue, as we would say, with someone, it's your spiritual responsibility to go to that person within 3 days and resolve it with them privately. And in one of the Sufi orders, another Sufi order, one that is closest to us, every meeting would begin with 3 questions. First question would be, is there anyone in this community who has been hurt by another who wishes to bring that grievance before us? The second question is there any married couple here who are having difficulty that they would like to bring before this community? And the third question is there anyone in this community with any need whatsoever that they would like to bring before the community? So these 3 questions are asked before the worship being a period of chanting, singing, meditation. But rarely are things brought up at that point, because the assumption is that these should all be taken care of even before you arrive at the worship. So it reminds everybody that it's our responsibility to, as much as possible, deal with these issues, so that when we arrive on that, let's say, Thursday night of remembrance, that we arrive and have an environment that is as free of any kind of resentment as possible. Because resentment is considered a toxin that will prevent what would otherwise naturally happen in a true worship situation. In a true worship situation, when human beings are orienting their hearts towards God, it is perfectly natural when your hearts are pure and relatively free of resentment for that community to ascend, for the vibration to ascend, for you to be lifted very naturally and move stage by stage closer and closer to the divine presence, not only on that particular night, but week after week, year after year. The major limiting factor on this process would be the resentments that we bring and never deal with among each other. So this is another way in which community and the common vibration and quality of vibration of the community develops, and how we are blessed and benefited by that collective worship, collective remembrance, but especially and primarily when our hearts are pure, relatively pure. Nobody's heart's completely pure, but when we are relatively free of those toxins of negativity, judgment, blame, resentment. May I read you a poem of Rumi's that talks a little bit about the blessed beauty of what's possible? I mean, Rumi always has this, what he expresses so often is that he was intoxicated with the divine and its beauty and generosity. That's all he wanted us to know. That's really what it's all about. So, just a minute. This is from a book called Love's Ripening. These are some of my own recent translations of Rumi. And this one is called We Are Now One. We stood together hand in hand in primordial time. Let's take this to be us right at this moment, okay? Don't think this is about somebody else, somewhere else, some other time. This is now. We stood together hand in hand in primordial time. Now at last, we are one again. We are all of one soul, struggling along one path, and all drunk with the same wine. From among the two worlds, we chose love alone. Except for that love, there's nothing we adore. What bitterness did our souls suffer from separation? At long last, we are free from separation. A ray of the sun came in through an opening and raised us up in dignity, however low we were. O sunlight, don't withhold your loving radiance from us. Aren't we sitting in the robes of your radiance? By your radiance, we who are stony are transformed into rubies. It is because of you that we exist. Dancing like particles before you, in our yearning for you, we abandon all our chains. Rumi.
I would like to break in for just a second. A few things you said could be reminds me of things that I've encountered at Gethsemane, for instance. You talk about the guest being God. And in the guest house, it says, the guest is Christ, right? Something like that. You talked about resentment, and in the Gospels it says, if you've presented your gift at the altar, but you have something against your neighbor, go deal with that first, and then come present your gift at the altar. And in Rumi's poem, he just said, we have chosen love alone. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, there's the words there by the little courtyard, God alone. And God is love. So what do you make of these connections, corollaries? I mean, it seems like there's something there that can't just be attributed to tradition. It must somehow be the source of tradition. Where do these parallels come from? Of what are they born? And one last question. To see the person as Christ, or to see the person as God, without theological language, how would you explain that to someone? What is it really getting at? What's it pointing to? What's it talking about?
Truth. If we think that truth is an intellectual proposition, we are just thinking. We could argue about any intellectual proposition. What if we define truth as our experience of the divine? Our experience of it. What if it's possible for a human being to cultivate that experience more and more? What if that experience has a transformative effect on our very self? Now to talk, not theology, but metaphysics. Really simple metaphysics lesson. I really believe in metaphysics, that there is a kind of a, there are spiritual propositions that are different than the propositions of, shall we say, a materialistic philosophy. Here's a proposition. Everything that is conscious in us, everything that is beautiful in us, everything that is worthy and virtuous, comes from a spiritual source and is reflected through us. That spiritual practice, the reality of spiritual practice, apart from all the religious formulations, is to be in union, in harmony, connected to that spiritual reality which we can connect to through the human heart. We've been given a heart which has the sole purpose of connecting us to that reality and reflecting that reality into this world. The heart is like an organ for sensing relationship and for sensing a qualitative universe. So, the same consciousness that is in you is in me and Brother Paul and all of you here. I don't mean that it is an abstract, impersonal consciousness. In fact, we each experience it in our own individual way, and that's our soul. But that soul gets its energy, that soul gets its reality, its beingness from the only being that is. So, as we move experientially away from this false world, the world in which we believe only in material things, in fact, the most important things are invisible. Friendship, love, integrity, gratitude. All these things are invisible. The more we move from preoccupation with things, like my resume, my equities, my car, my possessions, the more we move from a dependence and preoccupation with those things into spirituality, into the pleasure and the joy of experiencing that we are essentially spiritual beings, the more we will see in each other the reflection of that source, because we are all of that source. We will even see it in people who deny it, who are totally veiled from it. But we will see it in them. And our seeing it in them may help them to see it in themselves. So we live, the truth is that the material stuff is not very much of what is. What mostly is are the divine qualities, one divine being who is manifested in so many different ways, who is manifested as the beautiful Jesus, who is manifested as the noble Muhammad, who is manifested as the illuminated Buddha, and who is manifesting as you now. So, we can know this, we can be conscious of this, by quieting the mind, by stilling the reactive emotions, by stepping outside of our usual egoistic patterns into other kinds of relationship.
And to do that, you have to be present. You can't just think about these things, but you have to be with yourself to begin with. And that's where silence can be so helpful and so central. Because unless you're able to be present to yourself, you cannot be present to another person. And in the process of being present to the divine illuminating cloud, if you want to call it that, in which we are immersed, you can find that affinity in another person. And I think that's why, prayer and meditation are so very important. It's like the boot camp of relationship. It's not a separation from relationship, but it's the thing that can really give depth to what goes on in the rest of your life. And so, what is that meditation? What is that prayer? Well, really, it's nothing. There's not much to it. It's not a thing. It's not even quite a practice. It's just a being. And we are being with the being of God. And God is pure being. Getting back to the metaphysics, and what are we? Well, we are participating in the divine being. We are participants in the divine nature. And so, when you come to that reality, everything else is secondary. And that means that it becomes important in a totally different way. But it's not the core of the wheel. In fact, without the hub of the wheel is not really a hub. The wheel is not really a wheel. You need to have the center of the wheel in order to define and structure the whole of the rest of reality. But when you see all the rest of reality as something coming together in the center and the core, then it's a beautiful thing. It makes total sense.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Paul, for bringing us back to presence. If presence sometimes seems an elusive something, I think it can actually be taught and practiced. If you say to a group of people, be present, they'll usually think, well, you mean pay attention. But actually, maybe we mean more than that. For instance, sometimes we are people who are lost in our thoughts. When we're lost in our thoughts, we're not very present. Maybe, for instance, maybe while Brother Paul was talking, maybe I wasn't really listening to him. Maybe I was just thinking my own thoughts when I really should be listening to him. We get lost in thoughts, or we get lost in emotional reactions. Or maybe if our body is uncomfortable, we're thinking, oh, how can I be comfortable here? You know, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's whatever. Let's try a little presence experiment, shall we? Just a little, let's see if we can build presence out of what is here right in this moment. What if we were to say, first of all, let's each be aware that we're breathing. Just take a moment and be aware of your breath. Let every exhalation, empty you of any tension, anything other than ease. Breathe out and breathe in and awaken with every in-breath. So just simply be aware of the breath. Now add to that some sensation in some part of your body. Choose maybe the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet, and just be aware that not only are you breathing, but you are embodied. Feel your torso, your upper torso perhaps, or the space between your ears, or let the muscles of your face relax, but know that you are embodied and you are breathing. Now presence is awakening, something that is capable of being aware of breath and sensation at the same time. That which can be aware of breath and sensation at the same time can also be aware of these words that this person up here is speaking. And also you can be aware simultaneously, what is the condition of your heart? It's probably relatively peaceful, relatively calm, relatively happy, I hope, at peace, at ease. So we have our thoughts, our feelings, our sensation, our breath, all in a single field of awareness. That single field of awareness, this is an extraordinary gift. Imagine what you could do with it if you really took responsibility for it. Now let your presence grow beyond the bounds of your body, and let it expand to fill this whole room. Maybe even open your eyes and remember that you're breathing and you're embodied, and you're aware of some thoughts, and you're aware of your heart and peace, calmness, hopefully, of this moment and the space that we all inhabit. We're aware of that, and now we're each in each other's presence. Well, we were already anyway, but we didn't know it. So this is presence, this capacity of the human being to direct attention, and to direct it especially in this comprehensive way, to be aware of all of this from silence, even while I'm speaking. My awareness is in silence. My words, I need to say these words just to communicate something, but I'm not caught up in the words. I'm in the silence, and so are you, even though you hear the words. And this is not hypnosis, this is de-hypnosis. This is awakening. This is being fully present. Together in a room, a group of souls that have come together, because undoubtedly everyone here has a spiritual yearning and a spiritual sensitivity. And presence is the beginning of awakening all of our human faculties to meet God. And we'll meet God everywhere we look, in every relationship, in every breath, in every moment. If we're present awareness, now present, know you are a soul with a body, and a heart, and a mind, and a breath. And all of this is streaming to us from the consciousness of God. Where else would consciousness come from? You didn't invent it. It's not just a phenomena of your own electrochemical apparatus, which you call yourself. It's infinite, it's conscious, it's divine, it's of spirit. It's what we're here to awaken in order that we might realize Jesus' beautiful words, peace be upon him, that you may have life and have it abundantly.
And I'm aware that I'm glad that all you people are here. Somehow being placed here in the middle of rural Kentucky, I think it's a beautiful thing that this sort of thing is happening here. And we can be together in silence and just in the relaxation of words coming to mind and leaving the mind. When I'm in choir, of course that's one of the constant disciplines of the monastic life, I think starting out the prayer with breath, and awareness of breath, is really the beginning. Be present to my own breath. And then I'm much more capable of giving voice to the words, to embodying the text, and letting the flow of the whole choral effort have its own freedom and carry me along with it. But to do that, I have to be present to what it takes for me to do that, and that is just be this breathing character. But there's such a thing as the song of silence. And you evoked that very well today.
Thank you, Brother Paul. Maybe Rumi wants to speak again. May we? This is one I wanted to share with us. Again, it's about relationship. Expanding friendship. Money and real estate occupy the body, but all the heart wants is expanding friendship. A rose garden without a friend is indeed a prison. A prison with a friend becomes a rose garden. If the pleasure of friendship and relationship did not exist, neither men nor women would be here. A thorn from a friend's garden is worth more than 1,000 cypresses or lilies. Love sewed us securely together. We owe nothing to the needle and thread. If the house of the world is dark, love will find a way to create windows. If the world is full of arrows and swords, the armorer of love will defend us. Love itself describes its own perfection. Love itself describes its own perfection. Be speechless and listen.
In a moment, I want to open up some questions from the audience, but I would like for us to talk briefly about the possibility of interreligious community. In many ways, we live in a shattered world, and I don't think it's necessarily shattered by theologies, but perhaps superficial theologies. That if we're meeting at the depth, then our theologies become transparent to these spiritual truths that we're talking about here. So what is the possibility for the future? The past has been less than ideal. The present is less than ideal. How do we move forward?
I think the poem was a wonderful, love is the thing that shields us in a dangerous world. Love is the thing that knocks windows into iron walls. And so if we practice love, if we're following love, the rest will be taken care of. I think we have to have more confidence in love. And to do it, to abide in love and make love the chief means, and it'll happen. It's going to take a lot of faith because it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But nevertheless, if we really cling to that, it will.
And there's a great, thank you, Brother Paul. Yes, there's a great 13th century Sufi saint buried in Turkey named Haji Bektash. And he has a number of precepts, and one of them came to mind as you were speaking about love. Haji Bektash says, "Do not hurt even if you are hurt." So love is more than being positive, it's the strength to restrain ourselves from reaction. I think it's worth mentioning, just because there's so much misunderstanding, that from the Islamic perspective, from the Quranic perspective, the diversity of religions and cultures is by the permission of God and serves a purpose. The Quran says this very explicitly. It says, God says in the divine we could have made you into a single community, but we made you into different nations and tribes and religions in order that you might learn from one another. So vie with each other then in doing the good. It should be clear that at the level of the contemplatives, there are no arguments. We might have interesting discussions of slightly different perspectives on things, but having worked with many contemplatives across many traditions, we have so much more in common than anything that separates us, because we all are making a similar journey. And argument comes from egoism. Argument comes from being caught in a very superficial part of yourself, where you feel out of egoism the need to be right and to prove others wrong. So what is the biggest danger in the world is not religion or even governments. It's human egoism, which has the power to corrupt everything. And certainly can corrupt religion, can even corrupt spirituality, and can even corrupt mysticism. It can infect anything. So what we need more than anything in this world is the knowledge of how to deal with these egos, this false self that's in every one of us. We need an applied spirituality. We need wisdom. It's not some vague thing. It's not just platitudes. We need the knowledge of how to deconstruct the false self and live from our real self. And I believe, by the way, that at the level of contemplative spirituality, we can learn from each other, because no one lineage has all the answers or the most beautiful answers. Does the act. Looking outward to find fault with others, which is a hallmark of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is typically, in all across traditions, It is a betrayal of the inner life and a defaulting to an idolatry of the outer life in religious forms. Never said it that way before, but it's a preoccupation with, is everybody else doing it right? As I've been told is the only right way to do it. And focus on externals rather than an inward focus on examining, when we're looking at our own motivations and our own inner life, we don't have time to be judging anybody else. And it's not our business anyway. So those are, is that enough for you to to work with? Not that you need to work with it, Brother Michael, but somebody once came and very naively and sweetly asked, how can I be selfless? How can I be truly selfless? Because almost everything I do, I mean, there's some little bit of ego there. What can I do to be completely selfless? And I said to that person, don't worry about being selfless. Let's just start with letting go of all your negativity and let's see what's left.
Please. Yeah.
Just a comment about love. I remember as a young girl, falling in love with certain things, and it just preoccupied my whole life and how I treated other people. And then as I have learned to love God, when I'm really in touch with that, I can just do anything. I just feel that love is such a motivator. And I realize now it's that love of God, love of the divine. If I sort of stay on that track, I feel I can do anything, and it's all good. I just agree with what both of you have said. Well, your talks today have been wonderful, but what you brought out in community, if we can just love each other and see the divine in each other, realize, like, instead of kissing the bottle, we could kiss each other as we greet each other and just appreciate that. So, and then I heard a song once that says, love changes everything. I believe it. It does, if it's real love. So, that's my comment.
Thank you.
Please.
You all consider yourself to be going in the same direction. I know, just speak for your community, if you would, or religion. Should we focus on how we get there, or the path we take, or our dedication to the path we've chosen?
Is there a difference between?
Actually, in his class, we talked about, he used a podium, and he described two men coming up each side, and one man climbing this side. Everything he sees is completely different from the man on the other side of the podium. But once they get to the top, they're at the same place. Mm-hmm. And would you all consider that, whether it be Islam, would you associate Jesus Christ and Muhammad as possibly being just part of a whole entity?
Well, as a Muslim, that's not the least problem for us because we accept Jesus Christ. Not theologically as some Christians do, but we love Jesus and accept him as a manifestation of God. And so let me try and answer this in the simplest way possible. If our path is true, if it's based on true spiritual principles, as we focus on our own path, it will lead us towards universality. It will lead us toward understanding the truths that we will then see in other religions if we have the time to look at them. So, to put it another way, I believe, by the way, I qualified that because not every system of religious teaching is necessarily true. I'm not trying to say which are and which aren't, but if at least it's based on universal spiritual principles and love and goodwill and righteousness, then it will lead you to the point where you will be able to see, I believe, the truth of other religions and find your common ground with them.
I like to think in terms of a rose. All the petals come together at the core of the bud. But we are out on the tips of the petals. Now, I don't believe that all religions basically are the same. God help us if they were. We would be losing so much. But they overlap. So it's just like the petals on a rose. They overlap. But they all come to the same core. But it's part of my religion to be that petal. It's part of your religion to be another petal. And yet, we're all producing the same fragrance, and we're all shining with the same color, and it's all drawing from the same source. Ultimately, there's only one person. Now, this is getting into complex metaphysics, perhaps, but it's what I learned from Dan Walsh, my philosophy teacher. And there is the person. The person. That's what was created. Well, it's not even created. It's uncreated, too. And each one of us shares in the personhood of the person. And person is not distinguishable between this person and that person. It's just simply you. There is the basic you. And the basic you diversifies in the individual. But the basic you is both created and uncreated. So that's why we talk about we're all made in the image and likeness of God, to put it in our own vocabulary. And you're a shadow of God. You wouldn't have the shape you were unless that shadow was being cast, the Zalem, and in Hebrew. So I don't, yes, we're not only just going in the same direction, we're already there in a certain way, or that's where we're all coming from, and we're expressing in different ways.
This at least is how the mystics talk.
Yes, Fred.
Brother Paul, I would like to thank you particularly for a sentence that went something like, we are all in the divine illuminating cloud. Wonderful sentence. And there's the 95% of emptiness that God just is. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. As a teacher and a parent and a grandparent and a friend, how can we help to instill hope in our young people?
I think it's by living what we talk about, being that reality, and not so much talking about it, but just being it. St. Francis said, preach always, but use words only when necessary. And so, even though your children might disagree with you or say no when you're saying yes, and vice versa, in the long run, if you're living in the truth, they'll get it eventually, some way or another. I mean, it may take them another 2 decades or so, but the fact of if it's real, if what you got is real, it's going to be a powerful thing.
And may I try to answer it in a slightly different perspective and say, what is faith? What if faith has nothing to do with beliefs? What if faith is the conviction that we live in a spiritual reality that is fundamentally beneficent, intelligent, and it can be trusted. That no matter what happens, there's nothing to fear. That no matter what happens, it's the divine compassion and beneficence is what's always operating in every detail of human experience. What if faith is our perception that we live in a divine reality, and that this reality can be trusted, and that in every circumstance of life, no matter how painful, there's always a way back to that divine presence, that divine inner strength and protection. If we can communicate this at first, if only as an idea. Of course, we have to know it and realize it ourselves. That this existence itself is a blessing, and that even our sufferings and tests are also a blessing. A person of faith knows this, and will live it, and will communicate it to children. That faith is something we're slowly building through our perception of how things really work. And sometimes you only see in retrospect that the sufferings I passed through were a blessing. It's all blessing. It's all mercy. It's all intelligent guidance. And every detail of every human story has that blessing.
Yeah, I noticed over the years I've been teaching, a lot of students and a lot of people that are seeking, they really need to, I think, start with loving themselves, but that kind of sounds like egoism, loving yourself. So can you distinguish between, and we want to avoid egoism and being proud, or you don't want to be proud of your accomplishments? And but how do you distinguish between, because a lot of students that I know put themselves down and say negative things about themselves. That you don't want. But also, you talk about egoism. What do you mean by egoism? How do you distinguish it between loving yourself, which I think really starts there, and you can start loving other people?
As Matthew said, there are different signs on the road. Some say stop, some say merge. So there are different teachings and truths that come at different levels. When a person is living in the state of toxic self-deprecation, they need to come to a healthy state of self-acceptance. That's not egoism. In fact, the self-deprecation is egoism. It's a false concern with self. It's living in the false self. Every person is worthy of love. So that's a stage to acknowledge. But once one is secure and knows that they are loved in a cosmic sense, that the divine, that they're loved by the divine, and they experience that, usually through being loved by human beings, then they can go to the further stages of purifying that self and giving up any sense of self-importance, any sense of entitlement and false pride. But that's a later kind of work. So it's a big subject, in one little answer, it's really, this is like the course of life.
Would you say that would be the same as saying knowledge is different in different states of consciousness?
Yes, there are definitely different stages, and there are certain truths and lessons to be learned at different stages. So certainly loving oneself is not egotistical at all. Excessive self-love is.
St. Bernard has a treatise on love, and he starts out, the lowest form of love is love of yourself. Now, if you can't even love yourself, you're not able to start. So at least you have to get that far. And the reason why people put themselves down is because they're comparing themselves to somebody else, and that's the ego game. So they want to be able to say, I'm as good or better than that person, and that gives me affirmation. Well, that's ego. But to be able to love yourself for your own sake is already the beginning of love. So you have to come to that. But then the next stage is to love God for your own sake. In other words, to get the goods of life, I need God. I have to look towards God in order to just get to survive and have the means of existence. I pray for this, I pray for that. God will answer. And so I love God. I love God for my own sake. And then finding that God is good to you, you begin to love God for God's sake. Now it's yourself that is loving God for God's sake, but you're going beyond yourself. You're no longer at the center of it. And then the final stage is to love yourself for God's sake. And since God loves me, I love myself because God loves me. And that's the resurrection.
The way I interpret love is not a romantic love, but as another word for acceptance. Acceptance of just how I am. Acceptance of just how you are. Unconditional love and acceptance would be my definition.
Thank you.
Are there any others? If not, we'll start to bring everything to a close. I just thank you so much, Kabir, Brother
you.
Paul. It was really wonderful. And thank you. And thank all of you for your silence and listening. Just a few closing remarks. The word dialogos comes from two Greek words. Logos is word, and dia doesn't mean to, it means through, or even completely throughout. So that would be the inquiry I would invite everyone to take. What would the world be if when we spoke completely? What would the world be like if when we listened completely? And I'm going to end with a Rumi quote. I hope, Kabir, that's not offensive. So, okay. It is indeed ironic. There are many people from India and Turkey who speak the same language, while there are countless Turks who really can't understand one another. The universal language is authentic insight. To be one in heart is surely superior to only speaking the same words. Okay, thanks everybody for coming out. It was a great evening. We've got books from Brother Paul and books from Kabir out there. So if you are interested, please survey. And there's also catalogs from the Festival of Faith, which are just free. So just pick one up. This is from the Festival of Faith last May. They're completely free, so just pick one up, please. And if you want a signed copy, then we can probably make that work too. So, okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.